Hey, good morning. Brother Chad Long here from Delhi Baptist Church. I'm getting ready to go to San Marcos and do my volunteering stuff, but I wanted to spend a minute with you this morning in the Bible. And we are in Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 31. Actually, I may read into it from 29, but it's stuff we've covered. But just because we've had the weekend to forget some of it. I love the direction that this chapter is taking us, and we'll see this if we get to the end of the chapter, because it leads right into chapter 11, which is known as the faith chapter, and you'll see where I'm going with that in a minute. But I want you to understand that some of the best evidence for Paul as the writer are found here in this section. While we can't prove anything certain, there's a lot of evidence. And I'll show it to you. But we're going to pick up here, let's say, verse 28, it says that he that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sorer punishment, suppose ye, shall he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. For we know him that hath said, Vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. Again and again the Lord shall judge his people. We've pretty well agreed thus far that the audience Paul's writing to are Jewish believers. While some in their group may not be truly saved, the majority of them are. It's just like writing to any church. When you write a letter to a church, you're addressing the entire church. And there will be people in it who do not know the Lord, or who may have just recently accepted the Lord and don't know a lot about Him, or those who know a lot about Him but have never made that sincere, heartfelt transition. So the main audience are Christians, and so that's the way we're going to look at this. I can't help who else may have been in attendance, but I can tell you the vast majority of these folks are believers. It kind of grieves me to know that he thought he was writing to an experienced group of believers, and he has to tell them in the letter, and we talked about this back when we found it early on in the book, that they were a lot less mature as Christians than he expected. I think Paul expected more from the Jews because they were God's people and they had access to the law. And this is a trap preachers fall into too. You think, well, if I can read this and understand it, whether you've been to seminary or not, if I can read this and understand it, people who are should be my equals should know these things. I mean, it doesn't make sense for me to look at other 42-year-olds who are raised in church and them not know the things that I know about the Bible that I've had the same amount of time that I've had. And so it's a trap you fall into because people mature at different what's the word I'm looking for? Different speeds, it's not the word I want. But anyway, as people grow in the Lord, they mature at on different paces. It's not a set pace. It's not like public school where you have these grades and everybody goes through them at these ages. And even in those situations, everybody doesn't mature the same. But anyway, it's just something you have to be mindful of. I'll move on and come back to that. He says, verse 31, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Now that can work for believers and non-believers, because a believer comes under a heavy hand of God. I believe it's in Psalm 32 and verse 4 where David says, upon me thou hast had a heavy hand. And there's a section in Ezra that I remember reading where Ezra said God's hand is upon him for good. And as our Father, He can be heavy-handed, He can be light-handed, but His hand's upon us. And it's a fearful thing to fall into His hands if you're out of His will, because He will smack you around a little bit. I'll say this. It was a fearful thing to fall into my dad's hands when I knew that I had done something wrong. Just as my earthly dad would correct me, my heavenly Father will correct me too. So anyway, there's that. But in addition to that, if you're lost, it's even scarier. It's even more of a fearful thing. So this verse can apply to believers and non-believers alike, but it's a very different thing between God's correction and God's judgment. If you belong to Him, you will be corrected. If you don't belong to Him, one day you'll be judged. And so either way, it is a fearful thing to fall into His hands. I just assume if I'm going to fall into His hands, I fall into His hands as one of His children. And I do, because I am. Verse 32, but call to remembrance the former days in which, after you were illuminated, you endured a great fight of afflictions. Again, we believe these are believers. After they were illuminated means after they got saved. Actually, I wish it said it that way, but it's okay. It just means once you came to the light. Illuminated means light. Once you came to know Christ, once you accepted the gospel, you endured a great fight of affliction. Sometimes shortly after you get saved, you'll be attacked because the devil doesn't want you serving God. And he doesn't want you to serve God at any point through your Christian walk, but especially early on. If he can get you off track, he can keep you from doing anything positive and constructive for the Lord, he's going to do that. So Paul's reminding them here that early on they did great. By the way, I've witnessed this a lot in churches. People who start out doing marvelous things for the Lord, and as they get older, they get bitter, they get tired, they get complacent, they get aggravated, they get misdirected. We talked yesterday about King Asa, who did a wonderful job early on in his monarchy. And I think 35 years of his reign, he just did a wonderful job of leading Israel and following God. As he got older and he got more irritable, in fact, I heard somebody yesterday in choir practice talking about how, well, when you get older, you'll see this different. And this, see, I don't want to. That's what I'm trying to explain to people, and it's like going right over their head. I don't want to get to a point in my old age where I don't still trust the Lord with all my heart, where I don't still give everything to Him and lean on Him entirely. That shouldn't be a youth thing. It shouldn't be a bravado thing. It shouldn't be a macho thing. It should be a real, sincere trust in the Lord God Almighty. You should be able to, just like Paul's telling them, call to remembrance the former days in which after you were illuminated, you endured a great fight of afflictions. He's saying, just because you're older now and more mature, supposedly, doesn't mean you give up doing those things you've always done. Stay firm. Keep the faith. It grieves me to hear people say, well, when you get older and your health goes to declining, you'll change your view on your faith and who you trust and how you... Let me say this, and I'll have it recorded for all eternity, and God can call me out on it. I don't care if I'm 80, 90, 70, whatever. When it comes to putting my faith and trust in a medicine or a doctor, it's not going to happen. I'd rather die. And I mean that. Now, I'm not saying I won't go to a doctor. I'm not saying I won't take medicine. I'm saying I want to have the same faith I have in Him that I have now. My health is dependent upon Him. And it doesn't matter how old I am. I could be 12 and He could take it like that. There's a 7-year-old that we're praying for in our church who's going through chemotherapy and has kidney stones and I mean, just the very thought of a 7-year-old and those kind of health problems, who probably has better faith than I do. I don't know him. I just know that my heart goes out to him. This thing's not about age. It's not about time. It's about faith. This whole section is about faith, and it's, by the way, it's leading up to the faith chapter where we see some real, pillars of the faith. But we'll get there. I don't mean to get off on these other things that grieve me. I just want people to be sincere in their faith. And I want them to truly trust God. And it's not something I can do for you. It's something I have to do for me. And I hope that people will learn. But sometimes I feel like no one's hearing what I'm saying. Anyway, verse 33. Partly whilst you were made a gazing stock, both by reproaches and afflictions, and partly whilst you became companions of them that were so used. He said, while you endured this great fight of afflictions, part of it was during the time that you were made a gazing stock. You were made a public spectacle. And partly while you're watching other people, like Stephen, be a gazing stock. I mean, they made a spectacle out of that. I mean, it takes more than one guy to stone you. If one guy starts throwing rocks at me, I'm throwing them back, y'all. But it don't matter how many rocks I throw. If there's a crowd, I'm dead. I mean, there's nothing I can do. So anyway, they made a spectacle out of that, and others. They killed James. They killed Matthew, they killed, well, all the disciples. And this is partly a reference to that. He's saying, back when you were first eliminated, you stood for these things and you dealt with these things. You suffered through these things. What happened to you is what he's asking. Verse 34, for you had compassion of me and my bonds. The word gazing stock in verse 33 is something Paul uses in another letter. The fact that he mentions his bonds here, the way he mentions it, sounds like Paul. Doesn't have to be. There's many really smart people who think it's Barnabas, but I think he's talking about Paul here, and here's some of the evidence. I'll show you one more in a minute. You had compassion of me and my bonds. It means you didn't just care about each other, you cared about me too. And anybody else suffering for the cause of Christ. That's how strong your faith was. He said, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods. That's hard to imagine. To take joyfully the spoiling of anything. Anyway, knowing in yourselves that you have in heaven a better and enduring substance. Knowing that no matter what they take from you in this world, you have a better reward in heaven. I can't make this plain enough. There's nothing they can take from me. There's nothing I got that's mine. You say, well, if your wife was sick and dying, you'd change your mind. No, I wouldn't. If it was your kids, God help me, please. No, I wouldn't. They're His. Everything is His. And everything that's taken from me, whether it be riches, cars. I had a truck breakdown this week. I didn't panic. I wasn't even going to mention it, honestly. I don't remember how it got out, but it wasn't a big deal. I don't let those things really sway me. I just, my faith is in the Lord, no matter what happens. I don't care what happens next if this roof caves in on me. It won't change the fact I trust the Lord. And He's telling them, you did too. The spoiling of your goods, knowing that you have in heaven a better and enduring substance. Because there nothing will be taken away. Once my wife and I and our kids are in heaven with my grandparents and so many other wonderful pillars of the faith, there's nothing can be taken anymore. There's nothing to take. We'll live forever with the Lord. And so that is so satisfying to me to know that. I really want to finish this chapter, and I don't know that I'm going to have time to. We'll go a couple more minutes and see how far we get. He says, cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. Do not cast away your confidence. For you have need of patience, that after you have done the will of God, you might receive the promise. For yet a little while, and He that shall come will come and will not tarry. He's talking about the patience and confidence we need to have in the Lord as He's on His way back to get us, and we know it'll be soon, even though it doesn't seem like soon to us. Now, verse 38 is more evidence of Paul. It says, now the just shall live by faith. I'm going to close with this, and we'll pick up when we get into chapter 11. We'll just back up a couple verses. But this is a quote from Habakkuk 2, I think verse 3. And the beautiful thing about this is Paul used it in the Roman letter and the Galatian letter with a different emphasis. In the Roman letter, it was the just. Talking about the just, the saved, the just shall live by faith. The Galatian letter was about how the just shall live. Shall live, shall live, shall live, shall live. And then the Hebrew letter is talking about by faith, by faith, by faith. In Hebrews 11:6 it says, without faith it is impossible to please Him, for he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. This letter is fixing to take a dramatic turn toward by faith. The just shall live by faith. Now Paul wrote the other two, and we know that. This is more evidence Paul wrote this, and we're fixing to move into a section of faith, and we're going to talk about faith for the next several days. And I hope that you can find it in yourselves to put all your faith in God. Again, I don't care if you go to the doctor. I go every now and then. Very rarely, but I do go. I don't take a lot of medicines, but if I really need one, I will. I mean, I'm not stupid. I'm so full of faith from my Lord, who gave me the health and the ability to walk and to talk and to move and to do the things He needs me to do. And I don't have persecution, really. I mean, not really. The devil buffets me some, but I mean, there's nobody beating at the door with guns trying to arrest me and throw me in a prison for my faith. But I'm trying to tell you, whether it be health related, whether it be spiritual things, or an actual physical presence, somebody shows up and tries to hurt me or stop me, it does not change my point of view. My faith is in the Lord, and whatever happens, He can deliver me from whatever, but even if He doesn't, I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to make mistakes along the way. And I'm going to rub people wrong. And I'm going to make a goof of things. I goof all the time. But I think people know me well enough to know my heart's in the right place. And my question is yours? If you're watching this, I think so. I think people who take the time to want to try to study these things, even though there's better people to teach it to you, the fact that you're willing to listen to this and study this, I believe your heart's in the right place. But just make sure that's all I'm saying. And let's teach it to others, because it's a real deficiency in our society today to have people whose heart is truly, solely, sincerely wrapped up in their God and what He wants for them and through them and for them. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Be thinking about your faith. We're fixing to start studying about it. And pray for me as I pray for you. Try to have a good week. Tell somebody about Jesus, all right?